Okay, talking about the oil shock in 1970s. OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, for any number of reasons, decided that they were going to shut off the oil supply and increase the market price. Part of this was because there was problems in the Middle East between the oil-producing countries and Israel, and it was assumed that the United States in particular, and Western Europe in general, was supporting Israel. And there was a lot of fighting kind of going on at this time, the Six-Day War, and the 73 War, and so on. So these are making things volatile to begin with. But in any case, there were also ideological reasons to do this, and practical ones. OPEC thought that they could really jack up the price by cutting down and slowing the supply. And so what happened was that for a while, several months, about 6 months or so, in the early 70s, in 1973 and 74 or so, we would see things like this: no gas. You couldn't get any gasoline for your cars. Whether you were a trucker, whether you were a taxi driver, whether you just plain folk. And of course that has a real consequence to the economy. And so that really slowed the growth quite a bit, because you can't plant, you can't transport food, you can't fly, so any number of industries were affected in many different ways. And so we see the slow growth also contributed a halt to the post-war baby boom in the 1960s and 70s. Because a couple of reasons. One was women felt they had to enter the labor market. And because now wages are declining, household incomes are declining, women are thinking, well, I got to go to work too, to keep ourselves up with the standard of living that I've been accustomed to, or my parents have been accustomed to and expect from me. It turns out now I have to have a two-income family in this household. So women are thinking about going out to work. Okay, so what this means is that we see married couples begin to evaluate the costs and benefits of having babies. Almost like you might think about any kind of cost-benefit analysis for anything. You buy a new house, you buy a new car, a baby, $300,000 for college, no baby, $300,000 I can use for golf clubs or whatever. And so a lot of people were doing the math and starting to say, well, maybe having kids, or even a kid, may not necessarily be the thing that I want to do. This would be especially the case for women who are thinking, I have a little bit of some career pretensions, or I enjoy getting out of the house and working, or I'm not especially fond of kids to begin with. And so we started seeing the popularity of children declining, so the growth of the population started coming, I guess, much less, or the rate of population growth was much lower now. Okay. Now also too, as women started kind of going back to work, employers found an interesting thing. They started playing on the patriarchy, or the incipient patriarchy that was still there in American society. Because even though women could go out to work now, it was still thought that someone would be coming, and when women did it, it was like it's an extra thing. It's a little bit of gravy on top of the mashed potatoes. It's not really the meat and potatoes itself. So employers found that they could pay women substantially less than men. And women, because they thought they needed to get a second job, or they wanted to get out of the house and be alleviated of household responsibilities, they were willing to accept it because maybe this is what you get. Okay, this is the best I can do. It's the best I can do. And so we find now there's a workforce that was working for maybe half what men were working for. And at the same time, too, we find again, probably from cultural stereotypes and impositions from enculturation from little on, for the most part, these are not unionized, in-your-face, radical people or workers. So they were much more subservient, much more, willing to take a lot of gruff, because they felt they wanted it, or they felt they needed it, and so therefore you took what you could get. And at the same time too, they're an educated population. They go to school just like men. So they were finding the employers were finding that they could get an obedient, literate, and subservient workforce, and so why not? So we start seeing, in a sense, women being hired over men. Okay. And so what this did also, working-wise, broke the pro-natalist bias of American culture. Okay. Some people discovered the economic irrationality of having lots of children, or even the economic irrationality of having any children. Because what's the point? Okay, they're not really going to help us beneficially, especially in this time, in this economy. So maybe having children is something we're going to reconsider. At the same time, too, we start seeing things just in terms of medicine, availability of things that we didn't find before, birth control pills, condoms, and all kinds of things. So this notion that one could control one's sexuality and control when children, or if children would be coming, was again something relatively new. So sex then changed. Okay, instead of being something that's a duty for procreation, either to the family, to my name, or to my relatives, or the state, sex now became an activity for recreation, no longer procreation. Okay, and you start seeing things like this. People talking about the health benefits of sex. Okay, it's better for your blood pressure, better self-esteem, makes you thinner, blah 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 blah. Okay, which they're probably all true, which is probably why I'm still fat. But in any case, we start seeing this notion now of working wives changing the idea of sex. Now, once this happens, according to Harris, we see that it kind of fed on itself. So once we start seeing a lessening of maternal and wifely virtues, the women's lib movement began. Women started burning their brides, okay, which became kind of a trope to say in a catchphrase. The idea of personal and sexual and economic freedom for women, okay? Which of course I think is a good thing. And you see right here, like a woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle. So it was being even advocated at times that the men are kind of maybe an extraneous or even unnecessary. There were books written about men kind of being kind of irrelevant and not so important. Even anthropologist Ashley Montague wrote a book called The Natural Superiority of Women, arguing that just in terms of being able to handle pain, being able to just to work longer hours, to in terms of stamina, in terms of general all around health, women are much better, much more healthier than men in many ways. So it's a time for women to actually come. So it's at this environment that the women's movement started to come and to fruition and become popular. So at this point then, though, too, once women started flexing their muscles and seeing that they had actually a lot of social and economic power, we start seeing that those pay inequalities and all the subservience and things I talked about in a couple slides before, we started rallying against that, thinking, hey, wait a minute, this is kind of shitty. So we start seeing now the flagrant inequality in the labor market with things that they were questioning and protesting. And also, too, the expectations that we find domestically at home. So men would say, yeah, honey, you can go out and work, but what's for dinner? So the idea, yeah, you can go anything and do whatever you want, as long as, you're taking care of the kids and the family and me and so on. You can have any kind of hobby that you want. Women were saying, this is not a hobby. I have a career just like you do, okay? And so the expectations of husbands, that wives would work all day, then clean and cook at night, and then pamper their mates, okay, and be feminine and pleasant, and be, wonderful lovers and so on, women said, no, I don't think so. It's not really going to work, and so we started seeing a new strength being flaunted now by women. Okay. Now, once this happened, okay, we started seeing, too, another thing taking place. The American resistance, or the traditional resistance to homosexuality, was declining in step with the diminished popularity of children. Okay, so children and sex now are being questioned as being valuable. Or as being representative of sex, or maybe phrasing it the other way: if sex is no longer necessarily tied to children or tied to population, so if sex is something that's worthwhile in and of itself, well, at this point, why not sex of all kinds be okay? Okay, we can have sex outside of marriage. Marriage is no longer necessary because we're not going to have children. Do we have to have a marriage even? Can we have any number of partners? Can we have open marriages? Can we have group marriages? Hippies were coming. Can we do all kinds of things now? So there are new social experiments taking place. And of course, at this point, we start seeing homosexuals are winning a measure of acceptance from the community at large because the country had already turned against procreation as the only legitimation of sexuality. Okay? So at this point, then homosexuality is as good as any kind of sexuality. If sexuality is no longer tied to kids to begin with, well, who cares? You can sleep at the statue in the park for all I care. It doesn't really matter because sex is sex. Okay? And so we start seeing now gays deciding that they can make their move. They can come out of the closet. They can say, okay, all right. Okay? And so once the gays are coming out of the closet, it became a vicious cycle, vicious circle. So we start seeing that the taboos against homosexuality began weakening. Okay, just as the taboos against women working were weakening, just as the taboos about getting or not getting married, these are all weakening. Okay, so they're all kind of feeding each other and so on. Okay, so at the same time too, okay, we're not finished yet. So women's coming out and working, leaving the home, had all kinds of implications. And another thing we find happening here was that we see that women were competing for jobs with African Americans, especially in the service and information industries. Remember, women work cheap. Women work cheap. So it turns out that I can hire a woman for substantially less than I can hire even an African American male, who again were even working for a lower wage than the European American male. Okay, so women work, because they're working cheap and they're willing to work cheap. They were kind of, in a sense, monopolizing the markets, especially certain kinds of markets. Okay, and so by preferring women, okay, employers then closed the jobs to a lot of black youths, so African American youths, especially unemployed black males. Okay, and this consigned many to permanent unemployment as an urban underclass, because what happened, it kind of challenged them into some of the few economic opportunities that were available to them. Part of them being career opportunities in terms of, say, working in criminal activities, working in drugs. If I can work for McDonald's for $4 an hour at that time, but I can maybe work as a runner or a watcher, for a neighborhood drug person for $100 an hour. Obviously, economically, I know which one I'm going to choose. And so we start seeing that because of these changes in employment structures, unfortunately, a lot of African, not all, but a lot of African American men were being channeled into this life of crime. Okay. Then we also see too, with more women, okay, coming out and joining the workforce, and sometimes even employers preferring women, women achieved a certain degree of economic independence, at least compared to previous generations. So ask your grandmother. There's a good chance she probably couldn't get a credit card by herself, or buy a car by herself, or rent an apartment by herself. But now, because women are working, they have their own credit cards, they have their own credit history, that they can be independent. They are no longer tied to the strings of some man, so they can have some independence now. Okay, so they're no longer appendages to their husbands or their families. Okay, having to go along with what the husband or the family says, because they now can make their own high-end purchases. They have more control of their own economic destinies, which again has some pretty important consequences for society. The most important being, or not the least important being, okay, by not being economically tied to their husbands anymore, they could get jobs. They have opportunities to get jobs and work, which women didn't have, say, even 20, 30 years before that. Divorce is now more free. And so lousy marriages or lousy husbands, okay, we're no longer having to be tolerated.